Imagine for a second that you are playing a video game. You know the kind. A sandbox mode, where you've basically unlocked the entire tech tree.
Right.
You have the cheat codes, you can build a machine that gives you infinite energy, or an engine that crosses the galaxy in a nanosecond, or a weapon that can just flatten a mountain. You have the materials, you have the budget, and you have the engineering know-how to do it all.
The ultimate power fantasy. I mean, that is usually the goal of the game, isn't it? To maximize your capability.
Exactly. But then imagine you take those blueprints, the ones for the infinite energy and the warp drives, and you lock them in a titanium vault. You throw away the key. You decide consciously that building them would be a mistake, not because they wouldn't work, but because they don't fit the balance.
It sounds completely counterintuitive to the human experience. We usually define a civilization's advancement by what they can do. If they can build a Dyson sphere, we call them advanced. If they can terraform a planet in a week, they're masters of the universe. We see a button, and our instinct is to push it just to see what happens.
But today, for our deep dive, we're looking at a civilization that looks at that big red button and says, absolutely not. We're talking about the Antaran. And specifically, we are cracking open a very dense, very fascinating technical archive today. It's PDF 009, titled Antaran Technology and Spacefaring.
Yeah, this document is a beast. It is essentially a technical compendium, a strict engineering doctrine. But it reads less like a user manual for a starship and more like a systems design overview focused purely on the power of restraint. It really forces us to rethink what high-tech actually means.
So our mission today is to unpack the system for you. We aren't doing a history lesson on their wars or their heroes. We're looking purely at their systems design. We're going to figure out how they power a planet without burning it out, how they travel the stars without traditional engines, and why their entire engineering paradigm is built around the word no.
It's a fascinating study in discipline. The document makes it clear right from the executive summary. Antaran technology is not linear. It doesn't follow our standard curve of faster, bigger, stronger. It is entirely defined by compatibility.
Let's dig into that word right off the bat, compatibility. Because usually when I see that on a spec sheet, I'm thinking, does this plug fit into that socket? Or will this new software run on my old laptop? But in PDF 009, they seem to mean something much more fundamental to reality itself.
They do. The document outlines a concept called constrained engineering. The core thesis here is that technology is a tool to preserve equilibrium, never a substitute for it. Progress is measured not by capability alone, but by compatibility with planetary cycles, resource flows, and social stability. And this isn't just a nice sentiment they print on a poster. They have a rigorous, almost ruthless filtering process.
Right, the 3 tests.
Exactly. The source details that before any new technology is adopted, before a prototype is even built, really it has to pass 3 specific checks.
I have these highlighted because they are incredibly strict. And frankly, if we applied these tests to human history, we would probably still be using steam engines. Maybe not even that.
We might still be using the wheel, honestly. Let's look at the first one. Ecological impact.
Which seems standard on the surface. We do environmental impact studies all the time here.
We do studies to see how much damage is acceptable or how much we can mitigate later with other technology. For the Antaran, the acceptable amount of disruption is effectively 0. The design must feature extraction, conversion, and distribution engineered for maximal efficiency and a minimal entropic footprint. If a tech disrupts the planetary cycle, it is immediately rejected. But it's the second test that really separates their mindset from ours. Societal consequences.
This is the one that blew my mind. They actually ask, if we introduce this gadget, will it mess up how our society functions?
Precisely. They run extensive simulations. Will this technology create inequality? Will it isolate people from one another? Will it create a dependency that weakens the user? If the answer is yes to any of those, the tech is scrapped. They deliberately cap performance ceilings to prevent over-reliance.
That is wild. Think about the smartphone. If you ran the societal consequence test on the modern smartphone, it fails immediately. It isolates people, creates deep dependency, disrupts focus. The Antaran would have looked at the smartphone and said, burn it.
Without hesitation. They prioritize social cohesion over convenience. And they eliminate redundancy if it encourages laziness in the populace. And that leads directly to the third test, which is long-term stability. And when they say long-term, they aren't talking fiscal quarters or election cycles.
Right.
They're talking centuries, sometimes millennia.
So if something offers a massive benefit right now, like, hey, this generator solves our power needs for 50 years, but it creates a toxic byproduct in 500 years, they just walk away from it.
They walk away immediately. It's a total rejection of short-termism. The document references this behavior purely as risk management, not Luddism. That is a crucial distinction. They are afraid of technology. They're afraid of the entropy that unchecked technology creates. You have to remember the context from the earlier archives we've looked at, the old Antaran era.
Right, they're sort of dark ages, the folks who tried to build everything and nearly wiped themselves out.
Exactly. PDF 009 alludes to the fact that they strictly prohibit uncontrolled AI development and massive planetary terraforming. Why? Because the old Antarans tried it, and it nearly broke the planet. So this constrained engineering doctrine is essentially the immune system they develop to stop that from ever happening again. They embed fail-safes against runaway escalation at the very root of their math.
It's like they realize that just because you can play God doesn't mean you're actually good at it. So let's talk about how this philosophy applies to the nuts and bolts, or rather, the power chords. Because when most people who follow this topic think of the Antarana, they think of the flame.
The flame, yes, the planetary core energy.
Right. It's this massive biological life force deep inside the planet Antares. And I assumed, and I think most of you listening would assume, okay, that's their battery. They probably just plug everything into the flame and enjoy infinite clean energy. It's right there.
Yeah.
But PDF 009 says that is a massive operational violation.
It is strictly forbidden. This is probably the most common misconception about their entire tech stack. The technical compendium clarifies that relying on the flame for daily power, like lighting a city, running a factory, or powering a vehicle, is viewed as parasitic.
Parasitic, that is a very visceral word for an energy policy document.
But perfectly accurate to their worldview. The flame is the biological heart of the planet. It is a stabilizer. It is not fuel. Imagine if you decided to power your house by drawing blood from your own body. Technically, there's kinetic and chemical energy in there, but if you drain your heart to run your air conditioner, you die.
That's a gruesome image, but it definitely makes the point. So if the flame is off limits for the regular power grid, how do they keep the lights on?
They use what we might call conventional renewables, but evolve to an extreme degree of efficiency. The document lists them out clearly. First is stellar harvested energy,
which I assume is just highly advanced solar power.
Likely orbital or high atmospheric collection arrays, yes. But the interesting one is planetary geothermal energy. And the text specifically notes, from outside the life veins.
I love that distinction. It implies they have a geological map of the planet that shows where the blood flows and where the bone is, so to speak.
It shows their geological mapping is incredibly precise. They distinguish between dead geology hot rocks, magma chambers that are completely inert, and living energetic pathways where the flame circulates. They will tap the heat of the dead rock, but they will never touch the living veins.
It's totally surgical.
It is. And to manage the load and ensure minimal entropic waste, they use high-stability storage cycles. Basically, grid batteries that do not degrade. They design storage systems that can sit on a shelf for 1,000 years and still hold a perfect charge. This allows them to buffer energy over massive timescales, so they never feel an energy crunch that would tempt them to tap the flame.
So does the flame do anything for them technically? Or is it just there to be respected from a distance?
Oh, it does plenty.
Yeah.
But the document says it is reserved strictly for planetary stability, ecological balance, and extreme emergencies. Think of the flame as the immune system or the ultimate environmental regulator. It keeps the planet habitable despite the dying suns of their system. You don't use the primary life support system to charge your data pad.
That makes sense. It's the difference between drinking water from a tap and draining the emergency reservoir dry. Okay, so they have this constrained, highly efficient, very patient power grid on the ground. But then we get to the really fascinating part, space travel.
This is where the engineering doctrine becomes truly alien to us. The section in the PDF is titled Movement Between the Stars, but the governing philosophy is labeled Transition, not Propulsion.
I love that phrase, transition, not propulsion. Because when we humans think of space travel, what do we picture? Rockets, fire, massive explosions, just brute forcing our way out of a gravity well.
We think of overcoming resistance with sheer force, Newton's laws. For every action, an equal and opposite reaction, but they throw fire out the back to push the ship forward. The Antaran approach is diametrically opposed to that concept. They do not use aggressive acceleration. They don't use thrust in the way we understand it in aerospace engineering.
So how do they actually move? If you aren't pushing the ship, what are you doing?
According to PDF 009, they rely on precise space-time manipulation and high-stability field technologies. Instead of pushing the ship through space, they're altering the coherence of the fields around the ship. It is low-signature travel.
Can you break that down a bit? Field coherence.
Think of a submarine moving through water. A normal propeller tries to push the water out of the way with kinetic force. The Antaran approach is more like, imagine if this submarine could condense the water in front of it to become a vacuum for a split second. The ship isn't pushing. It's sliding into a path of least resistance created by manipulating local spatial fields.
Like they're just greasing the tracks of reality itself.
In a way, yes. It's about resonance. They tune the ship's reality to match the destination, and the universe essentially allows them to slide between the 2 points. But there is a huge operational constraint here. The document explicitly notes that their travel is incredibly slow and deliberate.
Why slow, though? If you are manipulating space-time, shouldn't you just instantly pop out at your destination?
Because the cosmic weather has to be right. They calculate vast cosmic cycles, gravitational waves, stellar radiation patterns, the natural ebb and flow of the interstellar medium. They don't just jump in a ship and hit a warp button. They wait for the conditions to perfectly align so that the transition is smooth and requires minimal energy.
The text mentions that they view risk as a warning signal to stop, not a challenge to overcome. That is such a fundamental shift from human explorers. We see a dangerous nebula and say, I bet I can fly through that if I go fast enough. They see it and say, the path is blocked. We wait.
It is the patience of a species that lives for thousands of years. They would rather wait a decade for a safe launch window than risk a 1% chance of a hull breach. And their architecture reflects this. They prioritize repairability and graceful degradation over peak efficiency. If something breaks out there, it fails slowly and safely, giving them time to fix it.
But there is one major exception to the don't touch the flame rule we talked about earlier, and this seems to be the most critical piece of engineering in the entire archive.
The indirect coupling.
Right. This is the one time they use the flame in spaceflight. But even then, they aren't using it as gas, right? They aren't burning it in an engine to go faster.
No, absolutely not. The expert analysis in the file describes it as a mediated indirect utilization of the flame, never as a direct drive. They use it through layered multi-stage transduction to shield the ship's reality.
Shield its reality.
Yes. When you are deep in interstellar space, or moving through these transitions we talked about, the structural distortion of space-time is immense. It would crush a normal vessel. Or worse, it would completely scramble the biology of the crew inside.
So they use the flame to basically hold the ship together.
They use a tiny, heavily mediated resonance of the flame to maintain navigational stability. It creates a localized bubble of their home world around the ship. Because the flame is biologically connected to them, this bubble keeps the crew compatible with the ship, and the ship compatible with reality, while they are isolated in the void.
That is wild to think about. It's like bringing a literal piece of the planet's soul with you so you don't dissolve into nothingness.
It acts as an energetic tether. But, and this is the biggest engineering constraint in the document, this is extremely dangerous. The text explicitly states that overtapping the flame would kill Antares. The transduction layers are there to preserve the source's integrity and prevent an overload.
Those are massive stakes. It's not just if the engine fails, the ship explodes. It's if we draw too much power, our home planet dies.
Imagine the moral weight on the pilot or the engineer of that ship. You are in deep space. You encounter an unexpected spatial storm. You are about to be destroyed. You could theoretically bypass the safeties, draw more power from the link, and save your crew. But if you do, you might extinguish the life force of your home world and kill billions of people.
And the document states very clearly that the ship's safety is always secondary to the planet's survival. That is a hard pill to swallow. Sorry guys, we're going down. We can't risk the flame.
It goes right back to their core philosophy of collective responsibility. And this physical constraint ensures that they never build a massive interstellar fleet. They practically can't. The coupling must be minimal and strictly time limited. It physically prevents them from becoming a conquering armada because the energy cost of running 1,000 ships would be an existential threat to their own world.
Which leads us perfectly into their views on colonization. Because if you have spaceships that can slide through reality, the logical next step, at least from a human perspective, is an empire. Let's go claim that star system. And that one over there.
And yet, PDF 009 describes a colonial theory that is purely about establishing nodes, not sprawl.
Nodes, so unconnected outposts.
Small, autonomous nodes. The technology they send to these colonies is deliberately different from what they use on Antares. It is designed from the ground up for full autonomy, because once a colony is established, the umbilical cord is cut.
Why cut the cord?
Because a colony cannot depend on the flame. They are too far away. The resonance simply won't hold across those distances terminally. So their tech has to be incredibly resource conserving and adapted entirely to local conditions. They are required to achieve full ecological and energetic self-regulation within strict temporal limits.
So there are no massive supply runs from the homeworld, no interstellar commands sending down daily orders.
None. The document is very specific on this point. Governance of off-world communities involves strict devolution of authority to local consensus structures. There is no permanent command hierarchy linking them back to Antares.
None at all. They just leave them completely alone.
The only connection is what the text calls periodic equilibrium audits.
Equilibrium audits. That sounds terrifyingly bureaucratic. Hi, we're just stopping by to make sure you haven't destroyed your new local ecosystem.
That is exactly what it is. It's essentially, see you in 500 years, show us your math. If a colony fails to balance itself, if it pollutes its new world or falls into social chaos or over-extracts resources, it fails. Antares will not prop it up artificially with emergency fleets. It's a sink-or-swim approach, entirely based on that ecological compatibility we discussed in the 3 tests.
It really reinforces the idea that they do not want an empire. They just want, survival. A backup plan.
Connection. The document explicitly says space travel serves connection, not conquest. They want to know what is out there. They want to secure the survival of their knowledge by planting stable seeds in other places, but they have absolutely zero interest in ruling those places. Ruling requires energy. Ruling requires force. And they have systematically engineered force out of their society.
But operating like this requires a tremendous amount of willpower across the entire civilization. Who actually makes these decisions? We've talked about the hardware, but what is the bureaucracy behind the Antaran space program?
Bureaucracy is safety is a very good way to frame it. You asked earlier, who pushes the button? The answer is practically everyone, and it takes forever.
So it's not just one director in a control room turning a launch key.
No. Space travel and major tech deployment require what they call the consensus chain. It is a formalized evaluation protocol. It requires approval from multiple societal castes. You need the preservers to sign off on the ecological cost, you need the shapers to approve the structural reality design, and you need the keepers of knowledge to check the historical archives for any precedent of risk.
And I'm guessing this isn't a quick Tuesday afternoon meeting.
The timescale for these forecasts spans generations. They weigh any proposed advancement against its potential to disrupt short, medium, and long-term balance across biological, cultural, and planetary scales. They might debate a single exploratory mission for 100 years before the ship is even built.
To a human aerospace company, that sounds like a nightmare of gridlock. To them, it's safety.
It is more than safety. The document uses a very specific phrase that I think is the key to understanding their entire paradigm. A technical failure in these matters is considered a moral error.
Wow. Not just, oops, the math was wrong, let's recalibrate, but we have failed morally.
Precisely. Because if the math is wrong, it means you didn't respect the balance. You acted too fast. You ignored a variable out of impatience. In their eyes, bad engineering is a character flaw. It implies arrogance. It implies you thought you were smarter than the planetary system you were manipulating.
That is heavy. Brings it all back to that old Antaran trauma. They are so terrified of their own capability for destruction that they have wrapped their science in unbreakable layers of ethics.
And it works. That is the thing we really have to acknowledge when reading PDF 009. They survived. They live on a dying planet with dimming suns, and yet they maintain a perfectly stable, highly advanced civilization. They didn't survive by conquering nature. They survived by submitting to its limits.
It's a civilization that views progress as a tool, not a religion. I think that's the concept that really sticks with me. We tend to worship progress. We assume new is automatically better. They assume new is inherently dangerous until proven entirely harmless.
And that profound skepticism is exactly what allows them to endure. If we look at this source material in its totality, it is essentially a highly detailed engineering manual on how to say no. How to say no to infinite power, how to say no to rapid expansion, and how to say no to easy solutions.
And by saying no to all those things, they get to say yes to existence. They get to keep living.
Exactly. There is a final philosophical note in the text that summarizes this perfectly. Space travel serves connection, not conquest. The flame remains the origin of life, not fuel for ambitions.
That really does sum it all up. The flame is who they are, not just what they use.
And internalizing that distinction changes absolutely everything about how you build a world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Antaran technical paradigm, it leaves us with a pretty heavy question. When we look at advanced alien civilizations in sci-fi, we almost always ask, how fast are their ships? Or how big are their weapons?
But looking at the Antarana, it's clear we might be asking the wrong questions entirely.
Right. It makes you wonder. In a universe where you have infinite technological potential, where you literally have the math and the materials to build anything you can imagine, is the ultimate sign of advancement the ability to build it? Or is the ultimate sign of a truly advanced species the wisdom to choose what not to build?
That is the exact calculus the Antaran perform every single day. And looking at the state of our own world, maybe it's a protocol we should start adopting ourselves.
Something for all of you to think about the next time a massive new tech disruption hits the market. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you on the next one.